This is not a message for everyone. This is a transmission for the starseeds, for those of you who know or suspect that you are something different, something unusual, not of this place. These are the messages for you. Don't expect anything here to make a lot of sense. Everything is entirely paradoxical and is for you to interpret and for you to discern what is true. Are there benefits to this awakening? Well, this is paradoxical because it's a paradoxical nature that while there is no you here, there is a life force that is moving through you clearly. So even after the awakening happens, there is indeed a life force that keeps on being lived through you. And this life force has seen through the delusions and the illusions of self. And now it has greater scope to be here. There is more energy throughput available. There is greater life force that is able to access through the body-mind structure. It is no longer caught up with identification, with dramas, with many of the problems that people find themselves in. It is greater scope for compassion and love and creativity and lightness and harmony and joy, because it is not stuck in the web of lies keeping itself propped up. There is less fear. All of these things are more available now. The concerns around death, a lot of them have fallen around because that has actually been experienced. The death of the ego, in a way, is the main death here. That is why they say to die before you die. And so now that that has been experienced, so much more of life is available. Because if you aren't afraid to die, you aren't afraid to live either. And now you can fully show up. The being that wants to move through you, the life force that wants to be lived, the expression that is unique coming through this mind and body structure, can fully be here. And this is a beautiful thing. This may take some time to integrate. It can be so much of a different reality at first after the awakening happens. But it is remarkably beautiful. There is so much more power accessible because things are not as they seemed before. And the ability to be with paradox. Life no longer needs to make sense because once you've been through this process of transformation, nothing makes sense as it did before. And so then everything makes sense in this new, very different way. There is more magic. The magic of paradox is alive and well because now you know deeply the experience is there. That what everybody else has thought and told you what you are and who you are, that has been seen through. And so now, through this awakening, yes, there is a lot more available than what was previously there through the limited, myopic human consciousness of the egoic structure. What are the benefits of awakening? This is a very curious concept. Because when you're talking about benefits, you're talking about receiving something. And when you're talking about receiving something, it sounds, well, there's only really ever somebody who's going to receive that. So the whole idea here would be that there is an identity, a personality that's going to get something out of the awakening. Perhaps even as though that they are going to be the one who awakens. This is hilarious. Because that's nothing to do with the awakening process. There is no benefit to the individual because there is no individual. So enlightenment or awakening, you don't become enlightened. You don't become awakened because there is no you. There is no you to be enlightened. And so all these people with all of this massive amount of effort all the time, meditating, trying to focus, trying to dedicate themselves to some practice to awaken and enlighten themselves, are deluded. Nothing's going to happen to them. And as long as they're coming from that perspective, it will always be elusive. The very thing that they're chasing, it'll be a perpetual chase because they are fooling themselves, or rather they have been fooled into thinking that there is something for them to get in this process. So that's nothing to do with how this works. there is nowhere to get and no one who's going to get anything. And for all those people who are like the group that I was with, in the Goenka cult, where we were all chasing enlightenment, aspirants, we were aspiring for this enlightenment experience. Well, you see, they were wanting that for themselves. Each person working diligently, doing retreat after retreat. They were trying to awaken, they were trying to enlighten themselves. And they were never achieving that because they were coming from the completely erroneous perspective. And if they were actually able to be straight with themselves, what they were really doing was they were seeking to be more peaceful. And more than that, they were just seeking to be happier. They were looking for happiness. And peace and happiness, those concepts are all in the domain of the first 4 steps that we talked about in that process. We could call those first 4 steps the pathway of joyous living. So that path of joyous living that we covered in the first 4 steps in the previous episodes, which were about grounding yourself and integrating into your body and the world, is the first one. And the second one, realizing that this is a tour that you're on, this temporary situation of being alive on earth. The third, awakening to being joyous and pursuing everything in the world that will lead you towards a joyous experience. And fourth, once you've experienced that joy, sharing that with others, like a loving, sharing experience. So that those first 4 steps are all about being happy, about being joyous, about experiencing the wonders of life. It's a very adventurous, enjoyable, fruitful experience of being alive. And I would say that most humans are not experiencing that, and they're aspiring to that. And so people who are looking for happiness or joy or peacefulness, even in their spiritual pursuit, they are still very much caught up in those first 4 steps. They are deluding themselves if they're thinking that they're going to awaken themselves to the truth, because they're still trying to get something. As though there is something to claim, something to receive. So in the awakening process, it's all about letting go. It's about surrender. It's about there's nobody there to receive anything. It's all about loss. It's the loss of the weight of existence. It's about a complete surrender where there's nobody who's going to receive anything. So in this experience, what's happening is that you've actually abdicated your drive, the push to awaken yourself. You see, so it's completely, you've let go of that. And now there is just the listening, there is just the unfolding, there is just the feedback. You've completely surrendered, because in the other modality where you're trying to get somewhere, where you're trying to get enlightened, trying to wake up, it's usually with a particular method. Usually there is a series of steps that the person is doing, a series of activities, a series of practices, and usually they're very attached to these practices. That was certainly the case in that Goenka organization, where everybody was diligently working on meditating 12 hours, 15 hours a day, and they were very much attached to that. In that particular system, they weren't even allowed to practice any other forms of meditation. So in that kind of system, you don't even have any freedom in your own mind, because in your own mind, you have to follow a prescription. Anytime you have aligned yourself to a prescription where you are expecting a certain result from a certain series of activities, there is zero surrender in that. No surrendering. You have committed yourself, you've hooked yourself to a methodology that you have become very attached to. Even if you can't see it, even if you can't see the attachment because it's hidden from your view, you are now aligned and attached, expecting a certain result. And if you are, and in that particular experience, and with those meditators, and most people in the world who are meditating, they're expecting the result of peace and happiness and tranquility. Nothing wrong with that. Those are wonderful things to aspire to. And if that's what somebody is seeking, then basically they're probably going to get that. But that is completely the opposite direction of what the awakening process is. In the awakening process, you have surrendered, and life itself is coming at you and awakening you through any means. You've surrendered to allow any way, any avenue open that will take you and open you up, smash your beliefs, and then you'll let go and something miracle will happen. So if you're pushing yourself And trying to get there, trying to awaken, don't kid yourself. Don't pretend what you're doing. It's much better to be straight with yourself and just say, hey, you know what? I just want some peace in my life. I just want some happiness and some joy from this meditation, this yoga, whatever practices I'm doing. And so half the time, people are actually just wanting to have that peaceful experience. And the other half, they're wanting to be part of a group where they can share about that with some others, where they can all say together, yeah, isn't this great? We're all in the right club. We're doing the right thing. So they're looking for affirmation. They're looking for a sense of belonging. Belonging is one of the most important things for humans to feel. I'm not saying it's actually like a good thing to feel. I'm not judging it either way. I'm just saying that nearly all humans, the vast majority of them, are completely driven to belong. And that's what has them group together, cluster together. And in this spiritual domain, they do the same thing, because it's the nature of humans to want to gather together and prop each other up with their belief systems. So they gather and they tell each other, hey, we all agree with this model, and now they feel more confident. Because because humans are lacking in so much confidence, they need each other typically to feel a sense of confidence. But what they're lacking at that moment usually is critical thinking, because now that they're aligned with a group, with a model, they can't afford to start criticizing that. Because and the main criticism that they'd probably bring to it, well, there's a couple of them. One of them would be, well, where is this teaching really coming from? Like, are we sure that this is actually, does it have our best interests at heart? Does it actually really want us to be free? What's its deeper purpose here? But because everybody's just busily going along with it, and they're not willing to ask those sort of questions. They want to just keep on going. And then, of course, the other one is like, well, is anybody else here in the group fully enlightened? Is anybody else here awakened? And typically not. I mean, maybe the charismatic leader of the group, maybe, but often they've died. And so it's hard to go and verify and check that. And usually they don't really, and even if they did say that they were, how are you going to prove it? I mean, how many fully awakened, enlightened beings have you even met? What we typically do is we project onto others our imaginary fantasy of what an enlightened and awakened person would be like. We typically think things like, well, they'll be perpetually peaceful. They'll never raise their voice. They'll walk with a steady step. Every movement of their body will be, transcendent. They'll have an air of being above everything, or whatever. They will just appear to be highly unusual. And you know what? Maybe it's like that. I don't know, have you ever met anybody like that? Well, guess what? I have. I've actually met one person in my life. When I was a monk, I took some time out as a monk, a Buddhist monk in Myanmar, Burma. And the person I did that with was it was in 2003. He was the most highly unusual person I've ever met. Absolutely, this monk I was with for a couple of weeks. And there was a little group of us, and he struck us so deeply that some of my friends, one of them in particular, went and spent 6 months with him after that, just to be close. But there's a quote from the Buddha where he says, this is 2,600 years ago, where he says, you can be sitting right beside me. You're completely in the presence of apparently the most enlightened being ever. And you can completely miss the point. You can profoundly miss every single thing I'm sharing. And you can be a million miles away from me. And you can tune in to this message and fully awaken. And that's the message, one of the messages from the Buddha, from Gautama Siddhartha, the Buddha. So there's nothing to do with osmosis. You can't just sit there and soak up enlightenment. If you think that you're part of some group and they are awakening, and you think, if I just keep on going there, if I just keep on hanging out with the group, if I keep on meditating at the temple, at the ashram, if I just keep soaking up these vibes, then I'm going to enlighten myself. I'm going to become awakened. No. All that's going to happen is that you're going to probably, hopefully, feel more and more peaceful, more and more happy, maybe more and more focused. Now, is it possible that those experiences of greater depths to peace, happiness, focus, could they lead to an awakened mind, an enlightened experience? Well, quite possibly. But it depends. Because while that is a very fruitful experience, and I'm not putting that down, obviously I spent decades doing that because I was very attached to the view that if I kept on doing more of these retreats and getting myself more and more peaceful, more and more focused, with greater samadhi, that type of concentration, then I would have a greater shot, a greater chance at becoming enlightened. And it didn't do any of that. I mean, well, not while I was doing those activities. You see, where the Buddha speaks of the three characteristics of the universe, of there being perpetual change, which is anicca, of there being constant dukkha, the suffering, the unsatisfactoriness of the nature of the universe, and anatta, where there is no self. Now, that third one is the most elusive. I could not understand what he was talking about for 25 years, about that long. So just by doing all of those things, and most of my friends, I've known many people who've done this for many decades, from their 20s to their 60s. Like, seriously, imagine being that dedicated. And they did not have that awakening process. They did not touch upon anatta. Why is this? Because part of the experience of being so aligned with that sort of practice is that you restrict your ability to review everything. And so because you've restricted your viewpoints, this means that you are basically tethered, you're attached to one angle on life. Essentially, even though it might be quite complex, that perspective, it's coming from one perspective. So, whereas it's quite likely that it's the breaking down of this attachment, that it's the multiple viewpoints from radically different perspectives. I'm talking about radically different perspectives. So you've already been grown in a society where you have the mega social viewpoint of what reality is. And this is probably the depth of your perspective. Very hard to break that. It's very hard to break these paradigms. So you're in that paradigm of this is what reality is, because everybody, all my teachers, family, parents, you name it, friends, everybody told me that's how it is. And maybe now you've gone and read some books or gone to some retreats or something else. And maybe you've even aligned yourself with a religion, a cult. And now you're hearing this other perspective. And so now you're aligned with that. Maybe you've even gone and sampled several of them. But you see, this is all still, one thing is to be attached to one of those viewpoints. The other is, even if you're open to multiple ones, it's still all in the domain of the intellect. It's still very much in the domain of your mind just working. And so that's why having access to completely different modalities, completely different paradigms, is what can enable this kind of breakthrough. But at the heart of it is also a view. If you have this view that I want to be awakened, I want to be enlightened, I want to get the benefit of that, then again, you're completely off on the wrong track. In the Eightfold Noble Path of the Buddha, his number one step is right understanding and right view. So there's 8 of those steps. We'll go through these in other videos, in other episodes. So how are you going to get this right view, this right understanding? From exploring life fully. And from giving up the perspective that it's going to be you who's going to get yourself there. And it's going to be you who's even going to get anywhere. Because there we have the perspective in the enlightening, in the awakening process, that there isn't a self. There is not an identity in the way that you think there is. That it is fictitious. And this is your number one attachment. Of all attachments in the world, so if you break them all down, you've got an attachment to your body. That's the number 2 attachment. So they break it down like this. Number 1 attachment is to your identity, to yourself. The second is to your body. The third would be to your family or your friends or society. It just goes on and on like that. And so this process that we're speaking of here is in contradiction to every single fiber of your being. It's that deep. It runs at odds with the very core of who you think you are, because you've been hypnotized into believing that you are something when in fact You are not that. You are something different. And this can only be experienced. And so, coming back to the concept here, the general point of why do this? Why should I go ahead and attach myself to this awakening process? Well, I'm not telling you to. I'm not even saying that I've already said there's no benefit to you in doing this. However, if you feel something, that there is something wrong here, something wrong is in the world, something is off, something doesn't click, then this is a sense that this is something that could be of interest to your unfolding. You see, it's not really the drive to awaken to the truth that will get you there. It's not being able to stomach the lies anymore. It's only when you've become so fed up with the lies of life, the lies of the human realm and what has been spun to you by all these groups and organizations and people, and you realize that these lies are basically what has even built who you are. When you realize that perhaps the very foundation of my being, the very viewpoint that I'm coming from, is nothing but a series of intertwined lies embedded within me and grown. So I'm grown from a bed of lies. If that becomes your experience, if you start to tap into that, then it won't be the seeking of the truth that will drive you. It will be, I can't stomach being a lie. That's certainly how it became for me. And then it becomes a very slippery slope. And that is why this is a very intense topic and not to be trifled with, because it's like playing with fire. If you are that curious about the nature of reality, if you start to become that fascinated and curious about what's going on here and what I am and what is a lie and what is the truth, then it is indeed possible to go all the way. And all of this around you is actually very flammable. The whole experience here of being in this realm of reality itself and of what you are is exceptionally flammable. And once you start playing with these concepts, and once you start sliding in this direction, well, you're kind of playing with sparks. And so then it can become very freaky. Because once you start sliding in this direction, well, you might end up just going all the way. And I'm not recommending that you do that. In fact, I celebrate who you are and your aspirations in the world. I think it's fantastic that you are a unique expression in this world, like a unique snowflake, as they say. And that is a wondrous experience to be had. And I certainly wanted to fully experience what it was to be me, in inverted commas. And I wanted to be sure that I had a fantastic, joyous ride. I wanted to know what it was like to be completely in love. I wanted to know what it was like to travel the world and to see amazing things. So I'd committed myself to that, and I did all of that. And it was like it had run its course. It's like, wow, okay, so I've done pretty much everything I wanted to do on this tour. Well, what's next? You see, only imagine that. What if you just go, I want to do everything on my list. I want to fulfill everything I want to do on this tour. And maybe after that, maybe then I'll be curious about, well, what is beyond all this? Is there something that is profoundly different? Is it possible to pull back the veil on reality itself and step through to the other side and awaken and potentially even become magical? Is all of this really possible? Well, yes. And as I've shared, there are some very strange keys that you can use, very strange access points. Indeed, in the world, there are locations that are access points, that are portals that you can go to, and they will help activate you in this process. And as I've already shared, there are substances, there are these magical sacred medicines, particularly the 5-MeO-DMT from the toad, which is very, very strange. That something can tear apart the fabric of reality and transport you, like interdimensionally, or I don't even know how to describe it, but certainly the nature of identity is radically different after such experiences. And then along with that, there is questioning that you can do. as I've spoken about with the liberationunleashed.com group, where they assist people in deeply questioning the nature of what they think that they are until they can unstack that, deconstruct it. And then, of course, there are the books by Jed McKenna, the scariest books in the world. All of these things, if one was so interested, it's like this is like a powder cake, and you've got all these little instruments over here that you can play with and set it on fire. But why would you want to do that? If you are loving your life, if you're interested in actually going all the way and having a joyous, loving life, go for that. Why not? Why not just do that and have a fantastic time? Why bother with all this other stuff? Only if you feel that you can't stomach the lies anymore, and you know if that's you. You will know in your heart of hearts if this is a path for you. And there is one other aspect to it, and that is, of course, that the egoic structure, the false identity, the fictitious self, there is something off in that. And there is something that is completely consumed with craving and the seeking of more inside that. And that seems to be what is ruining the world. This craving, this thirst, Buddha referred to as tanha, the second noble truth. This unending thirst for more of everything is consuming the world. And at its base is the identity that believes in itself and believes it needs more. And so if there was one reason, I would say, if somebody said to me, why ought I do this? What is the benefit? It's not a benefit to you. There is no benefit to you in this, but there is a benefit to the world. There is a benefit to reality. Because once you've cleansed yourself of the toxicity of identity, and that's what it is a toxicity, a virus that is spread throughout the human world, and every baby that gets born, they very quickly figure out how to put this virus of identity. They train this new being into being a self. They do this selfing thing to them. And then everybody continues with the selfing process until they have grown and they believe in themselves. And now they are a new economic unit as part of the social order that seeks to gain more and more, to consume more and more. And so the whole world becomes like this huge feast. That's how the humans relate to it. Like, I just want to eat the world. Everybody is busily consuming, eating, and it's eating up the whole world. And through them is moving this form of consciousness that has infiltrated and created a false identity in each person that makes them believe that they are somebody with the right to pollute and the right to consume and the right to get and the unending thirst and an unending inability to quench their thirst for more. That is what is at the very seat of each human. And can you root out and cleanse yourself of this toxic virus that believes that it is its birthright to consume the world? Yes, you can. Should you? Is there anything wrong with having an identity of being a self, to believing that there is a self there? No, there's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong here. This is a domain of play. This earth, this world, is a playground for all of us to explore and experience however we wish. It is a domain of power, of seeking power. That's what the whole game is about. And most people are profoundly disempowered. And because of their disempowerment, it's likely that they won't even want to touch upon what we're talking about here. So that's why I listed those 7 steps in that particular order. If you haven't gathered empowerment, if you aren't positive, if you aren't completely integrated in your body, your emotions, your spirit, all of that, if you aren't aligned with being super positive, you don't wake up every day with a bounce in your step and jump out of bed and feeling happy, focus on that. That's the first step. Absolutely. Don't worry about all this other stuff we've been speaking about. It's those first 4 steps that need to be completely grounded in your reality of empowerment, of living lightly, of joyous living, of being loving with everybody. That ought to be your focus. And if that's your focus for many years, or even the whole of your life, fantastic. It's only beyond that. And it's only for those who are thinking, wow, I just can't stomach the way this world works and that everything feels like it's a defeat. Then you can start to step beyond it. And I've shared with you the tools that will open and part the veil. Do I recommend it? Well, this is only something that you would know. But it is a beautiful expression that is radically different from anything else somebody could go through.